Josh, you were actually at the high court this morning. You heard the arguments. Even the conservative justices sounded like they were pretty rough on the anti-abortion side. What were they so skeptical about?
Well, that's right, Stephanie. I mean, we were thinking that this challenge would have a fair amount of traction with a 6-3 conservative court, but sort of pretty early on, it became clear that at least some of the conservative justices did not seem totally on board with this. I would say the two moments that really stood out in my mind were when Justice Amy Coney Barrett mentioned that some of the members of the anti-abortion medical group that is challenging these provisions that expanded access to the abortion drug mifepristone, that some of those medical professionals are in fact dentists. That suggested she had given a fair amount of scrutiny to their membership. And then we ended up for much of the rest of the argument debating whether two specific doctors had shown that they were going to be negatively impacted. And then the other one was in part of your setup there when we heard Justice Neil Gorsuch say that he thought that this case raised the problem of universal injunctions. That issue of nationwide injunctions has become a kind of a bugaboo in recent years, especially for conservatives, conservative legal scholars. And for him to say that in this case suggested that it's very likely that he's going to reject the notion of blocking the FDA's moves on this abortion drug.
Then, Josh, how did this case get this far?
Well, I mean, part of the answer, Stephanie, is this phenomenon that has developed in the last few years of groups being able to file these cases in specific parts of the country, in specific divisions of federal courts, where they know which judge the case will be assigned to. Or, you know, if they don't know for sure, maybe they know to a 90% or a 95% level of certainty. And this case was assigned to Matthew Kacsmaryk, who's a federal judge, who's a Trump appointee, who sits in Amarillo, Texas, and he used to work for a Christian legal organization. So you can understand why, of all the judges in the country, this group would have wanted to put it in front of. They chose him. And you have to think that that had some impact on the rulings that were issued.
Tara, Erin Hawley, the wife of Republican Senator Josh Hawley, was the lead attorney arguing in favor of limiting access to these pills. Now, I'm certainly not saying that the wife of a senator shouldn't have a power career.
Right.
But how is it that this woman is the person arguing this case for the Supreme Court?
I know, it feels very random, right? I mean, she should have...
Random or not random at all.
Fair, right. I mean, if she had any political antenna, she would know that this is not a good thing for the Republican Party right now. The last thing they want is another Roe v. Wade case to come up and for women to lose any sort of rights, because this is basically be rocket fuel for Democrats. I mean, you have the leader of the Republican Party, Donald Trump, unable to even really name his policy position on abortion because he knows how toxic it is.
He doesn't have to name it. He is the reason Roe v. Wade was overturned.
Absolutely. But in the meantime, he refuses to answer, 15 weeks, 16 weeks, he wants to seem ambivalent on it. He's trying to stay as far away from what he knows is a radioactive position that, yes, he'll take credit for in the right audiences, in the right settings. But when he doesn't want to take credit for it in front of, swing voting, educated women, he wants to be as far away from this as possible. But this is the Trump, conundrum. You can't nail him to the wall. And so he can, claim to not have any sort of fixed position on anything.
Except when it comes to Roe v. Wade, we know who's the guy. Kavita, I want to get your response to one of the arguments that Erin Hawley made earlier today. Watch this.
The FDA violated federal law and its duty to keep women safe. Women are now left to receive these drugs in the mail or in their dorm room without ever having been checked by a doctor for life-threatening conditions. That's reckless.
On its face, if one didn't know any better, they could say that sounds scary, right? You've got young girls getting this drug that gives you an abortion, getting it to their dorm room. What is your reaction? How does this drug actually work? How dangerous is it really? You actually know. You're not a dentist.
Yeah, I am not a dentist. I've prescribed this drug, and I've actually been through the different phases of what the FDA has done since approving this drug in 2000. Keep in mind, 24 years ago, this drug was approved by the Food and Drug Administration. And at that time, Steph, we had to actually go through pretty rigorous standards. You had to be a registered prescriber. I was one of them. You had to put in a lot of detailed reporting on talking to women about adverse effects, any side effects. And we couldn't even dispense the drug through a pharmacy. We had to have kind of in-office dispensing of the drug. We made it as hard as possible to get one of the most safe and effective drugs that, by the way, has had less serious adverse events than Tylenol, a very common drug that people do get in the mail all the time without even a doctor talking to them. So fast forward through COVID, all the FDA did was say, listen, some of those things that we did to relax the ability to get prescriptions on telehealth visits, to be able to get drugs through pharmacies and in the mail, we're going to go ahead and allow for that to continue. Why? Because it's safe and effective, and we have still required for prescribers to submit safety data, for the drug manufacturer to submit safety data. There's no relaxation. You aren't seeing just erroneous boxes of mifepristone and misoprostol just showing up randomly in people's, desk drawers or mailboxes. That is so far from the truth, but it's not shocking when they were also citing, blogs for some sort of scientific evidence, and 2 studies that they cited that were retracted by the very journals that published them. So on its surface, this all looked like it was legitimate because someone in the Supreme Court said so in front of Supreme Court justices. And I think that's the damage that's been done, Stephanie. No matter what, it appears that this is truth in some form.
Isn't the larger issue here, Kavita, that their argument is calling into question the FDA's authority when it comes to approving all drugs?
Yeah, they basically kind of threw, and I am not a lawyer, and I have done my best to get probably my JD on the side by going through as many of these legal documents. And sadly, because of so many reproductive rights cases, I've had to read a lot of these documents. And it is true that they have called into question and said that the FDA in places, they actually cite that the FDA did not evaluate safety data, and that in fact, this does have serious adverse events that have been associated, and the FDA has been negligent in their duty. And I just want to make something very clear, Steph, that we can talk about the science. I try to talk about the science. Donald Trump can put in an FDA commissioner that can actually make some of this and make it even harder to prescribe it without a Supreme Court case. So I live in a fear that we could have a commissioner in charge of an independent federal agency that is not so independent. We've seen this before, and that's what I worry about.
Josh, how do you think the court's going to rule on this?
I think they're not going to grapple with these issues about the fundamental powers of the FDA and how much deference to show to them. And instead, in this particular case, they're going to say that there's no standing, or there's not been enough proof of standing on the part of the people who challenged the anti-abortion medical groups. And that'll be the ground on which they sort of dispose of this case, which of course doesn't preclude anti-abortion groups from trying to bring another case in the future, maybe with some plaintiffs that have a little bit more of a clear interest in the outcome of the case.
Tara, we just reported at the top of the show, Marilyn Lands, a Democrat in Alabama, wow, right? The state that just put IVF at risk. She just won a seat in a special election in the state legislature, and her platform was based on abortion access. What does that tell you? What does that tell Republicans?
It tells me that these special elections, they drive out a lot of activists. They drive out people, a lot of single issue people. And I think it does show a lot of enthusiasm for the abortion issue, but I wouldn't get too caught up in it. I don't know that abortion alone, because I can't imagine people are going to go out to vote against abortion. Like, there's a very small group of people that will go out to lose rights, but there are a much larger group of people that will go out to have their rights, to keep their rights. And I think, that helps her in a special election, that people are, motivated. These are activists that are coming out. I just don't know how that's going to apply, and especially when you've got Donald Trump at the top of the ticket and you're going down ballot, and he's, he helps down ballot Republicans in Alabama.
Today, he posted that he does not want to, quote, terminate Obamacare, that President Biden is making this up. He says he's just going to make it better or cheaper. But for fact's sake, he used to say that all the time. Just watch this.
Real change begins with immediately repealing and replacing Obamacare. We want to terminate Obamacare because it's bad. The problem with Obamacare, it's not good.
Replace with what? He had 4 years in office to replace it. He's had however many of the last years while he's out there campaigning to tell us what he's going to deliver. Have you seen him lay out any sort of health care plan that's a better, cheaper alternative to Obamacare?
No, but this is the thing about Donald Trump. Does he really have any policies? Like, he's not.
No, but that's why we need to cover it.
Right, exactly. But he doesn't lay out policy. He's not a policy person. He's purely political. It's hard to find out anything about him. There's no great policy documents. They come from all these think tanks that are presented. He really had no plan. The only policies he may have had were his tax policy and deregulation. He did the tax cuts. And I think he was heavily invested in that. And he left it up to his National Economic Council, Gary Cohn and, Mnuchin, and they did it. But he doesn't have policy. That's not how he thinks. He's just going to say, I'm going to replace it. No details. He doesn't ever have details on anything.
Well, that's why we're going to cover it every night. Kavita, the current president and vice president put a big spotlight on health care during their campaign stop in North Carolina today. What do you want to see get done, right? Where do you see the biggest need right now when it comes to health care?
Oh, it's clearly in the states that have not expanded Medicaid. I mean, Texas and Florida, two of the most populous states, Stephanie. And this goes back to Supreme Court ruling that you remember all too well, unfortunately, right after 2010 and the passage of the Affordable Care Act. And that alone has created a gap for not just tens of thousands of people, but in effect, millions of people who have had underinsurance or lack of access to care. So I think that could single-handedly be the best thing that we can do. And the president made that announcement during the State of the Union that he wants to close that gap. And I think part of going out to North Carolina was to praise states that expanded Medicaid, but we've got to work on those, on at least two of the big ones, Texas and Florida.
All right, before I let you go, Josh, quick new topic. The judge in Donald Trump's hush money case has now imposed a partial gag order on him. What does that really mean? What can't he say?
Well, he can't attack what you might call the underlings in this case. He can't go after, for example, the line prosecutors that are prosecuting him. He can't attack court staff. Perhaps most importantly, he's not allowed to attack jurors or grand jurors to target them on social media. So those things are, not permitted. He's able to make some comments about witnesses, but can't say things that seem to address their testimony directly. That's something that his lawyers, Trump's lawyers, had asked for.
Hey, everyone. MSNBC has a new and improved app. You'll get real-time alerts and analysis, live blogs, in-depth essays, video highlights, and the best 2024 election coverage. Download the new MSNBC app. Here's how to do it. You tap on the App Store on your phone. You hit search on the bottom right corner. You type in MSNBC. You click on the MSNBC app. You click on Get or the cloud icon and enjoy it.